The dense forest of the Land of Fire was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves disturbed by a passing breeze. Sasuke Uchiha stood at the center of a clearing, his Sharingan eyes scanning the shadows with cold precision. He had come here to train, to push his limits further than ever before, but something was wrong. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen tension. His fingers twitched near the hilt of his sword, muscles coiled like a spring ready to release. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A kunai whipped through the air, aimed straight for his throat. Sasuke barely had time to react, tilting his head just enough for the blade to graze his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the weapon. It was his own. Before he could process the implications, figures emerged from the trees, their forms cloaked in darkness until they stepped into the dim light filtering through the canopy. Sasuke's breath caught in his throat. They were him. Shadow clones, identical in every way, from the black cloak to the crimson Sharingan eyes that mirrored his own. But these weren't ordinary clones, their chakra felt twisted, tainted by something he couldn't place. The first clone lunged, a Chidori crackling to life in its palm, the blue-white lightning illuminating the clearing in a harsh glow. Sasuke barely managed to summon his own Chidori in time, the two attacks colliding with a thunderous explosion of energy that sent shockwaves through the ground. The force of the clash sent both combatants skidding backward, but the clone recovered faster, vanishing in a blur of speed. Sasuke activated his Mangekyo Sharingan just in time to see the clone reappear behind him, a kick aimed at his spine. He twisted mid-air, blocking the strike with his forearm, but the impact still sent him crashing into a tree. Bark splintered under his weight, and he gritted his teeth against the pain. Another clone joined the fray, weaving hand signs with terrifying precision. Fire style, Great Fireball Jutsu, it roared, unleashing a massive inferno that engulfed the clearing. Sasuke countered with his own fireball, the two techniques colliding in a blazing storm of heat and flame. The air itself seemed to burn, the intense light casting long, flickering shadows. Through the flames, Sasuke saw more clones advancing, their movements synchronized, their intent clear. They wanted him dead. He couldn't afford to hold back. With a swift motion, Sasuke activated his Susanoo, the skeletal ribcage forming around him just as a barrage of kunai and shuriken rained down. The violet energy shield deflected the projectiles, but the clones didn't relent. One of them leapt high, summoning a perfect replica of his own Susanoo, the skeletal arm swinging down in a devastating punch. The impact sent Sasuke skidding across the ground, his ribs aching from the force. He coughed, tasting blood, but forced himself to stand. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his voice laced with frustration. Shadow clones weren't supposed to be this strong, this independent. They weren't supposed to turn on their creator. Yet here they were, moving with a level of coordination and malice that defied logic. The clones didn't answer, their expressions blank, their eyes empty yet focused. The battle raged on, Sasuke weaving between attacks, his Sharingan tracking every movement, but the clones anticipated his counters, as if they knew his every thought. One clone feinted left before darting right, its knee slamming into Sasuke's gut. He doubled over, gasping, but retaliated with a sweeping kick that sent the clone flying. Another took its place, this one wielding a blade of lightning that crackled with unstable energy. Sasuke barely dodged, the edge singing the fabric of his sleeve. He needed to end this. Channeling his chakra, Sasuke prepared his most devastating technique. Amaterasu. He growled, the black flames erupting from his eye, consuming one of the clones in an instant. The clone didn't scream, it simply dissolved into smoke, but the others didn't falter. If anything, they seemed to grow more aggressive. A clone dashed forward, its hand glowing with purple chakra, the Chidori spear. Sasuke barely managed to sidestep, the attack grazing his shoulder and leaving a searing pain in its wake. He countered with a punch infused with lightning chakra, but the clone caught his wrist, twisting it with unnatural strength. Sasuke gritted his teeth, flipping over the clone's shoulder to break free, but another was already upon him, a knee driving into his back. The force sent him sprawling, his vision swimming. He rolled to the side just as a kunai embedded itself where his head had been. Blood trickled from his lip, his body aching from the relentless assault. He had faced countless enemies, but never had he fought himself, never had he been so evenly matched. As he pushed himself to his feet, Sasuke's mind raced. There had to be a reason for this. Shadow clones were extensions of the user's will, their chakra. Had something corrupted his? Or was this something deeper, a manifestation of his own doubts, his own darkness? The thought sent a chill down his spine, but he shoved it aside. Now wasn't the time for introspection. Now was the time to survive. The clones circled him, their movements fluid, their intent clear. Sasuke tightened his grip on his sword, his Sharingan spinning wildly. He wouldn't fall here. Not to himself. With a roar, he surged forward, the battle erupting once more into a whirlwind of steel, lightning, and fire. The forest trembled under the force of their clash, the very air vibrating with the intensity of their struggle. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, unseen eyes watched, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. The forest trembled as Sasuke Uchiha leapt backward, his Sharingan spinning wildly, tracking the dozen shadow clones that had once been his own. Their crimson eyes mirrored his own, but their expressions were twisted with malice. Pathetic, one sneered, flickering forward in a blur of motion, kunai flashing. Sasuke barely dodged, feeling the blade graze his ribs as he retaliated with a chidori, the lightning screeching through the air, only for the clone to dissolve into smoke. Another was already behind him, landing a brutal kick to his spine, sending him crashing into a tree. Bark splintered as he gasped, pain flaring through his body. He had underestimated them. These weren't just mindless copies, they had his skills, his instincts, and now, his hatred. You think you're better than us? Another clone taunted, forming hand signs. Fire erupted from its mouth, a great fireball technique, forcing Sasuke to roll aside, the heat searing his cloak. He countered with his own flames, the two infernos colliding in a deafening explosion. Through the smoke, a clone lunged, sword raised. Sasuke barely parried, their blades locking, sparks flying as they strained against each other. Then, the real threat struck, a clone wielding his own Susanoo, its skeletal fist crashing down. Sasuke barely activated his own, the violet ribs shielding him, but the impact sent him skidding back, his feet carving trenches into the earth. His breath came ragged. They were pushing him to his limit, forcing him to fight not just his own techniques, but his own ruthlessness. You abandoned everyone, a clone hissed. Just like you abandoned Naruto. Rage burned through him. He wouldn't lose to himself. With a snarl, his Susanoo flared to full form, the armored warrior roaring as it swung its sword. The clone's Susanoo met it head-on, the clash sending shockwaves through the forest. Trees toppled, the ground fissured, and in that moment of chaos, Sasuke weaved hand signs. Lightning crackled around him, Kirin. The sky darkened as the dragon of electricity descended, annihilating half the clones in a single, devastating strike. But the remaining ones adapted. One activated the Rinnegan, warping space to evade his attacks. Another summoned Amaterasu, the black flames licking at Sasuke's defenses. He gritted his teeth. They were evolving, learning from him. He had to end this, now. Channeling every ounce of chakra, Sasuke's Susanoo transformed, wings unfurling, the perfect Susanoo's blade gleaming. The clones hesitated, then charged. The battle reached its climax as Sasuke swung, the force of the slash cleaving the earth, obliterating the last of his shadow clones in a cataclysmic explosion. Panting, Sasuke collapsed to one knee, his vision blurring. He had won, but at what cost? As the dust settled, a single figure emerged from the wreckage. A clone, barely standing, its voice a whisper. You still don't get it. Do you? Then it dissolved, leaving Sasuke alone, with the chilling realization that this fight had only just begun. The air crackled with tension as Sasuke Uchiha stood at the center of the battlefield, his shadow clones surrounding him, not as allies, but as enemies. Their crimson Sharingan eyes glowed with the same intensity as his own, their movements synchronized in perfect, lethal harmony. They had turned against him, a cruel twist of fate, their loyalty shattered by the very darkness that once fueled his power. Naruto watched from a distance, his breath ragged, his blue eyes burning with determination. This was the final clash, the moment that would decide everything. Sasuke's clones lunged first, their blades flashing like silver lightning. He parried, his sword singing through the air, but for every strike he blocked, another found its mark, a shallow cut on his arm, a bruising kick to his ribs. His breath came in sharp gasps, his muscles screaming in protest. He had pushed himself beyond his limits, but so had they. They knew his every move, anticipated his every thought. They were him, and that made them deadly. Naruto couldn't stand by any longer. With a roar, he surged forward, his Rasengan spiraling in his palm. He smashed it into one of the clones, sending it flying, but two more took its place, their fists slamming into his gut. He staggered, coughing blood, but gritted his teeth. Damn it, Sasuke. This isn't you, he shouted. Fight it. Sasuke's real body hesitated, his grip on his sword tightening. The clones weren't just attacking, they were whispering, their voices a chorus of his own doubts. You're weak. You failed. You deserve this. His vision blurred for a moment, the weight of his past pressing down on him, Itachi's sacrifice, the Uchiha's downfall, the endless cycle of hatred. But then he heard Naruto's voice again, cutting through the noise like a beacon. With a snarl, Sasuke unleashed his Susanoo, the skeletal warrior erupting around him in a blaze of violet energy. The clones were forced back, but they retaliated with their own, their Susanoo forms clashing against his in a storm of chakra. The ground trembled, fissures spider-webbing across the earth as the force of their collision sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Naruto saw his opening. Channeling Kurama's power, he cloaked himself in the Nine Tails chakra, his own form expanding into a massive, golden avatar. He slammed his fist down, crushing several clones beneath it, but they reformed almost instantly, their resilience terrifying. "We have to break their connection," he yelled to Sasuke. "They're feeding off your chakra." Sasuke understood. Closing his eyes, he reached inward, searching for the source of their rebellion. They were fragments of his own will, his own despair given form. To defeat them, he had to face himself. With a deep breath, he deactivated his Susanoo, standing defenseless before his clones. For a heartbeat, they paused, sensing the shift. Then, as one, they struck. Naruto's heart lurched. "Sasuke." But Sasuke didn't move. Instead, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I won't run anymore." The blade stopped inches from his throat, trembling. The clones' eyes flickered, their expressions wavering between fury and confusion. Sasuke met their gaze, unflinching. "I accept you. All of you. The anger, the guilt, it's part of me. But it doesn't control me." A ripple passed through them. One by one, their forms flickered, dissolving into smoke until only the original Sasuke remained. The battlefield fell silent, the storm of chakra dissipating into the wind. Naruto's avatar faded as he dropped to his knees, exhaustion finally catching up to him. But he grinned, relief flooding his chest. "Took you long enough, bastard." Sasuke exhaled, his shoulders sagging. The weight that had crushed him for so long was still there, but it felt different, lighter, somehow. He glanced at Naruto, the ghost of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Shut up, Dobi." The aftermath was quiet but profound. The village, though scarred, stood intact. The people watched as the two rivals, now something more, walked back together, their rivalry tempered by mutual understanding. The balance of power had shifted, not just between them, but in the world itself. The era of endless conflict was ending, replaced by something fragile but hopeful. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Sasuke finally felt the echoes of his past fade. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he didn't face it alone. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.